Consideration of resolutions. Will the clerk please read the title of resolution, Senate Joint Resolution 004?
Senate Joint Resolution 004, Senators Gardner and Hansen, Representatives Ortiz and Neville, concerning support for Ukraine against Russian aggression.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. President. We move Senate Joint Resolution 004 and ask that it be read at length.
Will the clerk please read Senate Joint Resolution 004 at length?
Senate Joint Resolution 004, Senators Gardner and Hansen, Representatives Ortiz and Neville, concerning support for Ukraine against Russian aggression. Whereas the post-war international security order, led by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, has relied upon diplomacy, peace, and open communication over armed conflict to ensure prosperity and stability for the over 1 billion people for more than 70 years, and whereas following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Ukrainian people voted overwhelmingly to form a nation independent from Russia, building a democracy and a thriving country grounded in the rule of law. And whereas in 2014, the pro-Western Euromaidan protest movement in Ukraine led to the resignation of authoritarian President Viktor Yanukovych, a brutal ally of Vladimir Putin, ushering in democratically elected leaders who have sought closer ties to the European Union and the United States, and whereas the Russian Federation, seeking to block the free will of the Ukrainian people in their pursuit of security, peace, and prosperity through closer ties to the European Union and the United States, annexed territory from Ukraine in 2014 and instigated, supported, and supplied a deadly separatist war in eastern Ukraine that has destabilized the region and killed thousands of civilians. And whereas the Russian Federation deployed military assets to support the separatist militias in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, resulting in the reckless missile attack that downed Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 and killed 298 innocent civilians in 2014. And whereas Vladimir Putin intentionally lied to his own people and to the global community to create a false pretext to invade and occupy Ukraine based on lies that Ukraine posed a threat to Russians and that falsely connected Ukraine and its political leaders to Nazism. And whereas the Russian Federation violated international peace and security agreements that sought a peaceful solution in eastern Ukraine and instead amassed hundreds of thousands of troops on Ukraine's border, and whereas Vladimir Putin has now launched an unjust and unwarranted invasion upon the peaceful nation of Ukraine, and whereas Russian soldiers are currently sweeping through the country, inflicting violence and terror upon millions of civilians, and destroying homes, businesses, and properties, and whereas Ukraine is a proud and honorable nation under siege, and the brutality of this unnecessary and violent war is an affront to both international law and common decency, and whereas Ukraine has been a bulwark against Russian military aggression in Europe, and Vladimir Putin has said that his goal is to recreate the Soviet Union and may have intentions to threaten NATO allies with military force, and whereas Vladimir Putin has sought to destabilize countries across Europe and interfere in other countries' elections and democracies, including the United States, and whereas the United States has galvanized the international community and our allies to impose the strongest possible sanctions on Russia and its financial institutions in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And whereas Colorado is home to thousands of Ukrainian Americans and to millions who care deeply for and stand strongly in support of the Ukrainian people, and whereas Ukraine deserves the support of every American and the entire international community as it defends itself from this unprovoked Russian invasion, the largest attack by one state against another in Europe since World War II. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Senate of the 73rd General Assembly of the State of Colorado, the House of Representatives concurring herein, that we, the members of the Colorado General Assembly, proudly stand along Ukraine, its people and its leaders during this horrific and unnecessary war, and vow to support Ukraine and hold Russia fully accountable for its catastrophic decision to invade. Condemn in the strongest possible terms Vladimir Putin's violent attack on the people of Ukraine, and strongly endorse the swift and severe economic sanctions and stringent export controls that President Biden's administration has imposed on Russia, and urge Russia to immediately cease its violent, illegal, and immoral assault upon Ukraine, end the needless bloodshed, and return to diplomacy and the rules-based international order that has ensured peace and prosperity for so many. Be it further resolved that copies of this joint resolution be sent to the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, the Majority Leader of the United States House of Representatives, the Minority Leader of the United States House of Representatives, the President of the United States Senate, the Majority Leader of the United States Senate, the Minority Leader of the United States Senate, and all members of Colorado's congressional delegation.
Is there any discussion? Senator Hansen.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And members, appreciate your time this morning as we consider this resolution. Just a few remarks to share with you in addition to the text that we just heard. I think we've all anxiously been watching the news over the last weeks and months in the run-up to what has now turned into a full-scale war in the Ukraine. For the last few weeks, President Putin has told the world that he was not planning to invade. I think we're pretty clear how that promise has gone unfulfilled. It was always his intention, and now we are in the middle of a full-scale war. President Putin has made a gamble. He's made a gamble that the West's reliance on Russian oil and gas will put him in a strong position, and that this will be a win for his idea of a greater Russia. We have a responsibility in this country and in this state to call his bluff, to make sure that that gamble was a terrible miscalculation. I'm proud to say that this body, that this state government and Colorado leadership has been part of a great effort to move away from dependence on Russian oil and gas. And we will continue that work this session into the future. And that is an opportunity that we all have to be a part of this transition. The next thing I want to mention is on the language from the resolution around strongest possible sanctions. It's an extremely important part of our initial response. I believe that includes excluding Russian banks and financial institutions from the SWIFT system, the international system set up for exchange. They need to be completely isolated from the international financial system. The other interesting thing that is unprecedented in world history is that a vast majority of Russia's wealth is held overseas. In fact, in 2015, it was estimated that 85% of Russian GDP was moved offshore. Think about that for a moment. The Putin oligarchs, the kleptocracy that rules the country, moved what is equivalent to 85% of the nation's annual wealth offshore. Take a moment and think about what that would mean if the United States was in the same situation. 50 multi-billionaires moving trillions of dollars offshore is essentially what the Russians have done over the last 15 to 20 years. Therein lies great opportunity for severe economic sanctions. And I believe that the international community with U.S. leadership should pursue that with all haste and going after these foreign-held assets and financial instruments. They're held offshore, and we must ratchet up the economic pain. And that includes going after Russian money laundering at every single opportunity. So there are a lot of dynamics at play here. We all know that. But Colorado has its part to play, and Colorado leadership will continue to be part of the solution. Folks, this is not a genius move on Putin's part. It is not a smart move. It is not peacekeeping. We all know that. Let us reject that notion clearly today with this resolution. Thank you, colleagues.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank my colleague from Denver for his remarks. My comments this morning will not be of the geopolitical and strategic nature, which are done so well in the resolution and by my colleague. I know that world well. You who know me well know that I spent the first of my several lives as a military man and trained in national security policy. Rather, I want to talk for just a couple of moments, and I can talk on and on a personal basis about my own experience in Ukraine in 2014 and both of their first two elections after the Maidan protest. Being an international election observer for an international organization as I was is not a lot different than being a poll watcher for your party in Colorado. You go to the polls, you watch people come, you look at the polling books, you see that everything's running smoothly and that the ballot boxes are empty when you start, and when they are taken to the counting center, they don't go somewhere else. And people often would ask me, well, why do you do that? Though I was a state legislator at the time, I wasn't chosen because I was necessarily. I was literally one of the people who went with another individual from a OSCE country just to see that elections were free and fair. In the summer for the election, I was in the northern neighborhoods of Kiev. And I remember watching this neighborhood. One particular neighborhood was a neighborhood of young working people, and they brought their children in. Mr. President, as you had your daughter on your hip in the first session, your first session as president, it was not unlike that. They came in from work, they came with their children, they came to vote. Desperately, having overthrown a corrupt government just months before and having 100 people die in Freedom Square, which I saw pictures last night were empty. Those neighborhoods had missiles fall on them in the past 24 hours, and I thought about those people I didn't know but whose faces I saw. And they weren't any different than the people that I saw as a party poll watcher in Colorado, just showing up to vote, to participate in their democracy, and then to having picked their kids up from school, or to go visit the grandparents when they were done. And I have thought about those decisions. We estimate right now some 5 million Ukrainians will leave the country out of 40 million or so, about a tenth of the population. Who are they? Well, they're people who have someplace to go. And if you saw some of the scenes of people, fathers putting their families on the train to stay behind and fight, it's gut-wrenching. We must support Ukraine in every way we can. I apologize for rambling. I just believe that when you see a people who have not had freedom, who desperately want freedom, and when you realize why must Vladimir Putin do something about Ukraine, because people who are very much like his people on his border in a country that was part of the Soviet Union are able to build a functioning democracy and have hard-fought elections. And believe me, those elections were free and fair, not without problems, as all elections everywhere in the world are. But a free people going and making a selection on the ballot of who they thought was best for their future, Vladimir Putin cannot have that on his border, because if he does, his own people will ask, why not us? And I would say to you this morning, in Ukraine, as we watch Ukraine, just realize, as Ronald Reagan observed, freedom is never, the loss of freedom is never more than one generation away. It can be us if we don't fight for it and if we don't stand up with them. So I thank you for hearing me out this morning, members, and I thank you for your support of this resolution.
Senator Janal.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, good senators from Colorado Springs and Denver, for bringing this resolution forward, and I rise in full support. Most of you know me, and I usually come up with written statements that I don't go off topic, but today I am going to go off topic. So one of the things that made me cry today, and I don't usually cry very often, is this picture in the Denver Post of this lady in Kiev with bandages on her from all the bombings that has been taking place. And you probably ask, well, why do I care so much? I do, for many reasons that we brought forth in the resolution, but many of you don't know that my ancestry goes back to, my DNA goes back to Kiev, to Moscow, to Krakow, and to Warsaw. My mother's parents, my mother's mother is from Kiev. My mother's father is from Moscow. My father is from Krakow, and his mother was from Warsaw. And this affects all of these nations. And my grandparents on both sides immigrated to Ellis Island in the early 1900s. And I know they were immigrating to the United States to have a better life. I think they also were aware of things that were happening in that area in the near future and anticipated getting out. But they left a lot of, they all had large families, and they left a lot of brothers and sisters and parents back there. This is why this goes down to my DNA and the fact that I'm here for the humanitarian aspects of what's happening to these people in Kiev or in Ukraine and every other country that's going to be affected. Poland is where some of these Ukrainians are trying to escape to, and they're starting to close the borders. And that's a concerning fact as well. I usually come up here with things to say in an order, but I don't know how to express my concern, my heartfelt, just where we're at here. I never thought that I would see this happen to us, and I hope that we can come to some sort of agreement to stop this where we are right now, to some negotiations. These are wonderful people, don't deserve to be in this situation. I couldn't just
stand here, rise to the resolution without telling you my personal story and how this affects me deeply as of Ukrainian, Polish descent, Russian descent, and how this is all coming together. And I hope that we can come to a resolution very quickly to help these people stop the suffering that we're seeing in the Ukraine and in other parts of Europe. So thank you, good senator from Colorado Springs and the good senator from Denver, for bringing this resolution forward, and I rise in strong support for the people of these countries that have been affected. Thank you.
Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, colleagues, for bringing SJR 004 this morning, which of course I rise in support of, and just want to add my voice to this hard to comprehend moment. I feel like as a member of our global human society, I've been paying attention to this issue and finding it an interesting juxtaposition alongside the Olympic celebrations and kind of having these two stories building and anxiously hoping that the predictions made by the smartest folks that we have in the U.S. government would not come true. I was hoping we would be wrong, that imminent invasion was not likely. But alas, like many of you, I started watching mainly on Twitter feed and then looking for more substantive sources and more information, just in kind of horrific disbelief of what I was seeing in this year and this time of one country invading another unprovoked and with false pretense. And so I so appreciate this very strongly worded resolution that we as a shared voice are taking as leaders. This is absolutely the right thing for us to do, and I thank the sponsors for bringing this forward. It's easy in these days to have this 45-second attention span, right? I mean, it'll be so easy for me today to walk out of this building, get in my truck to head up the mountains, and quickly start thinking more about the traffic I'm in, and instead of what's going on the other side of the globe. But I'm going to try hard to keep thinking about it, and to hold myself accountable for not too easily ignoring that there is a war between countries. I mean, men being asked to stay and fight while women and children are being evacuated. Ukraine forces blowing up their own bridges that they themselves built to prevent the advancement of another nation into their capital city. Chernobyl has been captured just 60 miles north. Chernobyl is now held by a different country from which the country it is within. Missiles pounding a capital city. A leader of a democratic nation asking his citizens to take shelter in a basement, but also please make Molotov cocktails to defend your neighborhood. These are shocking things to try to comprehend. And I think we also must hold ourselves to think about how we got here, of what unchecked nationalism can lead to. Strong men depend on the appearance of support. Strong men depend on consent for the reality that they've created. This doesn't, Vladimir Putin alone does not create this reality. it is created because there wasn't enough pushback. There wasn't enough pushback in the events leading up to this for the story that he was creating. But I want to add one other voice and image that I hope we can hold while we continue to try to comprehend and know how to react to this, is that Russia is not Putin. A despotic leader does not a country make. And while I keep thinking of what it must feel like to be in Ukraine right now and watching fighter jets fly over you when just maybe 3 days before you were trying to figure out what your grocery list was, that also there are people in Russia taking to the streets and to the squares to speak against this. A Russian tennis player just made a very bold act of, after winning a match, his first act of victory was to approach the camera and on the camera write, "No war, please." So I support those in Russia who are standing against this and know that there are people on both sides of this, the citizens, that did not ask nor support this war. But that those that express support of this violence, of this aggression, either implicitly or explicitly, should be ashamed, particularly if they are using a public platform to justify these actions in any capacity. I hope that they spend time looking at what's happening and question how their words have either shaped what happens today or will happen in the future.
Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you to the good senator from East Denver and to the good senator from Colorado Springs. I didn't know that story about you. I didn't know that that was part of your history, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. I think that we do our best work when we actually listen to each other and learn from one another. And as I've been reading the news and watching in my Twitter feed, it hasn't been the images of the violence that has made me emotional. It has been the images of fathers saying goodbye to daughters and thinking about the humanitarian and refugee crisis that we will be as a world confronted with. You all know that I worked at an immigration law firm for many years prior to coming to the legislature. And last night I spent some time with a number of immigration attorneys who are burned out, exhausted, but already gearing up to serve the clients who have had petitions pending for family members to flee Ukraine and get here to the United States. And so not only should our response be in terms of economic sanctions, but I would also hope that the US government, USCIS, and all of the federal agencies do whatever possible to support, whether it is a temporary protected status, whether it is for students from Ukraine who are studying here now, providing them with the relief that they need, we should open our arms. I know that we've done that here in Colorado for refugees before. I hope that we're willing and ready to do that again. Because the humanitarian crisis that this aggression from Russia is causing, that this aggression from Putin is causing, will destroy lives and destroy families. I just want to leave you with an excerpt from a poem that has really resonated with me. And it's by a refugee poet named Warsan Shire. It's titled Home, and I encourage you all to read it in its entirety, but I'll just leave you with a few words. No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only run for the border when you see the whole city running as well. Your neighbors running faster than you, breath bloody in their throats, the boy you went to school with, who kissed you dizzy behind the old tin factory, is holding a gun bigger than his body. You only leave home when home won't let you stay. Thank you, colleagues.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the sponsors of the resolution for bringing it, and thank you all for your words. I rise today not as the President of the United States or a member of Congress or even a member of this General Assembly. I have the opportunity to come to this mic and speak as a father. I was born in 1961. I was 11 years old when the troops came home from Vietnam. But I do remember kids I grew up with whose older brothers went there and some of them didn't come back. As a teenager, in high school and college, I understood the daily concern, the worry, the fear that someone somewhere might push a button and this might all come to an end. And then an American president stood up and said, tear down this wall, and the wall came down, and peace came, prosperity, economy came to Eastern Germany, and then the Soviet bloc fell apart. I have studied World War II and know something about the aggression of a dictator in Germany and how slow some were to respond when the first invasion started to happen. I hope that we're not slow to responding to this one. But I come to you today, colleagues, Mr. President, as a father of two sons. Am I anxious to see either of them be drafted, be sent overseas to fight for freedom? No, I am not. In my adult life, I prayed, you've heard me say before, in all things give thanks. I've given thanks that we have lived in a time where war has been somewhat rare. We've had the Middle East, we've had Afghanistan, the war on terror. But this is different. Is this a prelude? Is this the opening of World War III, some global conflict? I pray not. But as a father, I can't speak for a nation, I can't speak for a state, but Mr. Putin, if you think that parents in this nation are war hawks and are desperate to send our sons and daughters to confront you, oh, certainly not. But if you think we are soft and that our sons and daughters won't come to fight for freedom again, you are wrong. We know freedom here. We have been blessed in this nation We are so blessed that we get to come here and argue about public policy. But we don't take up arms against each other to resolve those disputes. But we know that sweet taste of freedom. We fought in this nation against each other. We have fought together against a dictator from Germany. In fact, we fought with the Russian people to defeat him. Do I want to see either of my sons drafted and deployed? No, I do not. If our sons and daughters have to go fight for freedom, not only for this nation, but for the world, and to those of you who have served, thank you. This all makes it much more real. We will. We will. Mr. President, I am so proud of the 35 members of this body, of your leadership in your call yesterday to notify me that this resolution would be drafted. To the the resolution sponsors, thank you for agreeing to immediately add your names to it, and I look forward to adding mine. To the people of Russia and Ukraine, as others have reached out to you, we are here with you. We need to find a way to resolve this without the deaths of our sons and daughters. But nothing is more critical for we human beings on this planet to join together in force to say no to a dictator. And I think, Mr. Putin, you are hoping that no one will stand up to you. I pray we do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Priola.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I rise in support of the people of Ukraine. I did the DNA tests a few years ago and had a conversation with Senator Court, and she was one of the first people that I called other than my family, because she had asked me a year or so earlier what, genes I may have or my background, and I said, I suspect I have some Russian in me, because I knew that my German ancestors had lived in Russia for a while. So when I got the results back and I called her, I said, I was right. It's documented that I do have Russian blood, but I also have Ukrainian blood. I even showed the good senator over there who's awake on the map. My fear has been for many years that history would repeat itself, because if you look through history, there are more times of struggle and war than there are of peace. And my fear and concern is that the long Pax Americana that we've experienced since the end of World War II is coming to an end. I've tried to think about why it is that there seems to be a pattern over every 70 or 80 years when there are major conflicts and struggles. And I can only think it's because the current generation doesn't have the institutional knowledge of how horrible war is. They don't, on a daily basis, see men and women who are broken or shell-shocked or walking around missing limbs and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, we have that kind of distance from the World War II generation, which many have passed. I have a 19-year-old son, and we've had many conversations on this issue, and my wife and I are very aware of what may be in front of our nation. I hope that we as a body, we as a state, and we as a nation realize how blessed we are and what a precious gift we were given by the founders, in that for 200 and almost 50 years, we don't fight house to house. We don't fight with roadside bombs and Molotov cocktails. We fight with speeches in the well and moving of bills and amending statute. Our founders were wise, and they realized that if they wanted their grandchildren and great-grandchildren to truly prosper and not have to rebuild their house every 20 years and have more children because many of them had to get sent off to the killing fields, that this institution, this form of government, was the best hope for their future generations. And I hope we, as a people going forward, give each other the benefit of the doubt, assume positive intent, I think this is a desperate move by Putin. There's a saying that anger is fear's mask. And if you look at what Russia has to offer the world, it's basically, I saw a quote, it's basically a giant gas station. And they can do the numbers too, and they see the rise of renewable energy and how it pencils out, and it is going to make their exports precipitously drop in the coming decades. And that will threaten their power, the people who are in power there. They won't have as much income, and then the people are going to turn on them and blame them for their standard of living dropping. So I think this is a distraction to try to hold on to power for Putin and his cronies. And I am confident that the world will see it for what it is and rise up and stand up to yet another dictator and despot. There have been all too many of them. There was one from Germany 80 years ago. There was one from France 200 years ago. They come up from time to time. But good people, freedom-loving people, rise up and fight and show them the door. Thank you for bringing this resolution.
Senator Quorum.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I will be very brief on this. I just want to, I think, put it into perspective. A quotation made in Germany, in the 40s by Martin Niemöller. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unions. I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. That's where we are today, folks. Thank you so much for running this resolution. And let's just do the right thing about Ukraine and the dangers in Eastern Europe that we're looking at now. Thank you.
Senator Lundin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I associate myself with the words we've heard from this podium and with the words of the resolution. It is the best that we can offer at this point is our words. And I would like to add just a couple more words in my best effort at Ukrainian. I would offer a benediction, a prayer. Bog daot nadezhdu. God brings hope. It is my prayer that God will bring hope to the people in this troubled region and a better future to them. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues, for your time. I often, like all of us, say, do we have time for this resolution? It's Friday, but your commitment and a moment taken to reflect on this demonstrates our solidarity as Coloradans and Americans to support peace, freedom, and the people of Ukraine. And with that, I renew our motion for the adoption of Senate Joint Resolution 04.
The motion is the adoption of Senate Joint Resolution 004. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 32 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, 2 excused, and 1 vacant, the resolution, Senate Joint Resolution 004, is adopted. Senator Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that today's roll call be added as co-sponsors.
Without objection, the current roll call will be added as co-sponsors.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Senators.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues.